Morning all, Wednesday the 4th of November. Tomorrow we get locked down again. Doesn't bode well for next year's shows, does it? But the plot's just been basically left to its own devices since the last show. The cover's come off, as you saw. And then I'll just let the other allotment holders help themselves, which has done a pretty good job of keeping them dead-headed for me. One thing is quite reassuring, I suppose, is that, not that you're going to love it for quality, but there's some broader petals coming on some of the flowers. We're just starting to get some cold mornings or cold nights. I think a bit of frost is on its way, and I'm just going to try and take out one of each tuber, just so I've got some backup stock to the pot tubers that I've already took out. Last week I started shifting some manure to the new plot. I say new, it's the one I grew the veg in this year, but we'll have giant decks in it next year. So far it's 35 barrel loads of 6-year-old horse manure on there. It's old enough to know that it's hopefully clean, and the straw is still sitting in the dump bags there. So to me, next season starts now, and as a restart when we start planting plants, but getting the stock, preparing the ground and everything else for next year really starts this year. And at this point we know whether we've got enough stock, or are likely to have enough stock, or we need a big borrow and steal some to fill the gaps. So we'll do a bit of lifting. I'm going to try. I've bought some kit to be a little bit more in front of the camera rather than behind it. We'll see how that works out, but we're going to lift a few tubers. Right, here we go, third time lucky. Velvet Supreme. Just going to lift this tuber. I've already cut the strings, so that takes a bit of time. And get the canes out of the way. Now just cut these roughly down. Takes a bit of cutting when they're quite thick stems. Get those out of the way. And then we've got some bits. The bits have come because you see, planting these plants quite deep into the ground, it does throw up facial growth throughout the season. Spade, not a fork. I'm going to make holes. I just want to dig around, and generally a couple of pushes in just to loosen around, get the excess off. There's one good deep push under the tuber and up, shake it, gets the worst off. Then I'll just get as much as I can sensibly off this tuber, so don't give yourself a hernia lifting it out. A good tickle. You might get bits and pieces coming off, but it doesn't really affect it in the long run. Just try not to take half the allotment back home with me. So it's quite a hefty clump we've got there, and it's full of tuber, so that's going to take some cleaning up. I'd rather do that from the comfort of my greenhouse, and when it's dried off a little bit. As you can see, there's quite a lot of water in the stems already, so that'll go back on the bench upside down to drain the water out, and probably before I get it home I'll just trim it. A bit further down. Now I don't need so many handles. It's a bit less stem to be carting around. So I'll go home now on the bench with a label in it, Elvis Supreme, and that'll give me some stock for next year. I have got pot tubers, but this is really just in case. That's those out. So we've got one, sometimes two, depending on what I think I've got in the pot tubers back in the greenhouse, of each there. So sort of 4 trays, probably about 40 tubers or so. Those on top of the pot tubers should be enough, but hopefully I'll sort these out in the next week or so, and the pot tubers, and then if I need to come and rescue any more from there, then I can. Tubers are good. Hopefully the fat stems won't rot too quick. I should probably get them on some heat fairly early, just to wake them up, and then just let them tick along. So that's that job done, along with the pot tubers. We should get there next year, I hope. See you next time. Morning. Time to sort the tubers out a bit. Obviously this is my greenhouse, just a 6x8 greenhouse, nothing technical. Pot tubers are in here. These have been lifted out for about 3 weeks now. I need to sort those out probably first. And up here we've got the field tubers that we lifted a week ago. You can see they're drying out quite nicely. I'm going to show you how to deal with those. There's no heat in here other than frost protection, and when I can, I leave the door open. But I just don't want these pot tubers sitting in damp soil, because it's not drying up very quickly any longer. So we'll show you how to sort those out. So we're going to start looking at some of these tubers. This is Louis White, and some of these stems are a bit soft at the top. So I'm just going to get out of the pot and then just break away the soil around the top of the neck. It's quite sound down there. Starting with Louis White because I want to actually wake these up a bit earlier than everything else, because of the variety being so naturally slow to start and doesn't really make much of a pot tuber. So we've got to that point. I've got a little bucket of water here, just to rinse it away a little bit. Excuse the cough, early morning. We're not going to get much cleaner than that, nor is there much need to get that any cleaner. And then just cut this stem down to where it's sound. You can see it's still green underneath. That's one done. And then we'll pick another one that doesn't look quite so appetising. And we'll see what we've got inside here. Again, mostly it falls away. There's a nice little nugget tuber, and the stem is sort of shrivelling away a bit. Given that they're small, it won't take long to dry back out again, especially with the greenhouse door open. Just make sure most of the soil is off. And again, trim the stem down. You can trim these finer roots off. Decent secateurs will do that. And if they don't, you nick the kitchen scissors, as long as you don't let the other half know you've nicked them. And that's done. So again, it's a nice small little tuber, and it's these that hopefully will get away. And if you look very closely there, there's a little green eye, so that might be quite useful. So that's the pot tubers. What I will do with those is put them into a tray and see if we can slowly wake them up, because I don't really want them to go fully asleep, because they tend not to wake up again. So we'll do that, and we'll look at some field tubers. Now traditionally a pot tuber is just a cutting, or a spare cutting that's been left in the pot. Mine were left in the 3-inch, or a bit bigger, but they're a 3-inch square pot, and then that was plunged in the ground just through the summer, gets watered now and again. Don't let them die, but I don't feed them, don't do anything other than just let them grow, and they form the tuber in the pot. Quite often roots come out the bottom. That gives us a nice small tuber to keep. It tends to shoot quicker and less likely to rot, especially with the giants when you see some of the size of the stems. Alternatively, this was a pot tuber I brought in of Bryn Turfle, and I would have got a couple of cuttings from it, and that got plunged in the ground. Now they don't look pretty. You end up with multiple stems and quite, I say, not pretty tubers. But what I do tend to find is the second year down ones do tend to shoot away quite quickly and give you multiple eyes. So if you do buy in a pot tuber and you get a couple of free cuttings from it, quite often you don't always get as many as you like. Don't discard the tuber, but you can just keep it in a pot. This went in a 5-inch pot rather than a 3, because obviously it started life as a pot tuber, and it'll still give you something you can probably work with further down the line. So don't discard your this year's new purchases. See if you can keep them ticking for another year. So we've got a seed tray here. It's just a deep seed tray rather than a standard one. I tend to use these, although you can't get masses in there. I try and normally keep one variety per tray, and that will give me all I need. Generally with the giants I'm only looking to get perhaps up to 20 plants of each variety. So I've got 10 or 12 to plant and some pot tubers for next year. With these Bryn or the Bryn family, after struggling last year, I thought I'm going to just take these pot tubers, set them up. I've got a Vitapod, which is just a propagating tray. I'm not going to put the lid on or the top on, and I'll have that in the greenhouse. I'm not going to turn on the heated bench that we're sitting on at the moment, because that's just a waste. But there will be a few tubers that I want to get away early, and once they're away you can just keep them ticking over. I don't use artificial lights or anything else, and find once they're going from tuber, just keep the temperature down and just keep them ticking along, and even take a few early cuttings. So I'm not going to overpopulate the tray because they're going to be in here for a long time. The compost is just a multi-purpose compost. As you can see, I've added a fair amount of perlite in there for drainage. These seed trays don't particularly have the biggest holes in the world, and in there is also some slow release fertiliser, and it's not that difficult with these. That's a little clumpy one, and I'll just nestle it in, push around the side. That's one. These are all Louis white. This is a very chunky tuber where the roots obviously come outside the pot, and just fill the tray up, make a little recess, nestle it in. And I'm not going to pack it round the sides, but I don't want them to just rattle around. This is still Louis. So we put him in there. I'll be rattling the camera as I'm doing this, but this one's actually got a shoot coming off the stem, which I'm quite happy to leave. And the last Louis. I've got field tubers of all of these, apart from the Louis. I didn't think I needed it because of the 5 pot tubers. Should give me all I need, and I'm trying to work from pot tubers this year rather than field tubers if I can help it, just due to the problem I had with the weed killer. So that's those 5. Now I haven't trimmed all these up. This is Aggie White. It's the only one I've got. I was struggling for stock, and there's a shoot coming from it, and it's not the biggest of tubers, so I didn't want to trim all that off. So all I will do is just nestle it in, and hopefully that will continue to grow given a small amount of heat. What I haven't done, I've just noticed, is trim the top of that tuber stem off, which I will do now. So that's an Aggie White, and then we've got 2 tubers of Bryn, again bit hairy, so I would just on this situation trim a bit off the bottom, make life a bit easier. And we tuck him in that corner. Make sure when you do this that you're not burying the crown. You don't want to put them under the compost, you just want them there or thereabouts. This is the one we saw earlier. Again, I'll just trim the top off. And this is the brin that was a pot tuber, effectively from Halls, and has spent its second year in the ground. We need a bit of room in there. Just tuck it in. I'm putting them to bed. The compost around the side. Give them a wiggle, tends to sort them out. And obviously, we remove the labels, brin and brin. So we actually have here now a tray of pot tubers. I'm trying to bang it not on the bench so the camera don't roll. Ready just to go on a bit of heat, and I should probably put them on around about 60 degrees. I don't want to raw them away, but it would be handy if they either continue to grow or start to grow, because I can probably get all I need from this one tray. So we'll carry on doing that with the rest of the pot tubers. The only difference with the ones I'm not going to start away yet is I won't put them in compost. I'll do that later, and I'll put it into a much drier compost so that they don't start to shoot, but they don't shrivel up too much, because these are smaller than the average bear as such. I won't water these in. The compost is slightly damp just because it's an old bag that I found, and that would be fine then to get those away if we can. Right, so while we're on the brin themes, this is the field tuber of Aggie White that I lifted out of the ground last week, and you saw me doing that. Now it's just been in the greenhouse, so there's no heat, no fan. I'll just leave the door open on a good day. And for me, I would say for Aggie White, it's not a bad tuber. I've got others that I've seen before that haven't been anywhere near as chunky as this. But I'm going to tidy it up with a mind that I might put it on the heat. If I'm going to heat a tray that takes 5 seed trays, I might as well put some on. So it's at this point I will just trim down that stem. I'm not one to really go butchering, well, it looks like I am, into the crown of the tuber with these stems. I think as long as the stem is sound, which this looks like it is, there's no point in digging too near the eyes of the tuber. It's good to expose the hollow, which that has got. And quite often with these ones, I will just have a little dig in there and open up the centre so it can breathe a little. As far as trimming a tuber, I haven't washed this. I won't wash them unless I really have to. It's been bad trying to get it dry, so you can just generally, back to the tickle again, trim up any tuber like that that's obviously waggling around. It's been damaged in the lift. Just get in there and trim it off. So where the kitchen scissors come in handy again. And while I'm going around just looking for damage and just trimming any of the fine roots away. You could dust the plant afterwards with a bit of sulphur, but I tend not to. Don't see the point really. I think as long as it's a clean cut, it doesn't tend to come to much harm. Even these long ones, I just tend to trim them back. Now I'm sure some people will treat this like a surgical operation, but I've never really found it to be much benefit. Just get the hair roots off, get tidy, and remove anything that's damaged. Now don't need to dig around too much around the crown there. It's quite nicely exposed. And just trim the fluffy bits off. These are tubers that tend to end up falling off if you're not careful, and they're sort of floating around, so just be a bit careful with those, because that one, as you can see, has got quite a nice eye area joining the tuber there, which is where it's likely to shoot. And I know you probably will see some polished and buffed tubers, but that's about as polished and buffed as mine get. Just trimmed up. Any soil that's in there is really drying out now. I suppose if you're on a very heavy soil, you might want to get it away. And some tubers that form a really tight clump, there's a couple here. The Elvis I lifted last week was a very nuggety tuber as such, and I should probably give that a little rinse in some water if I need to when tidying up. But that's that done, all tidy. Make sure the label stays with it. We don't want to lose that, and that'll be ready to either store as it is. We don't need it to be upside down anymore. Just keep the air moving around the top and wake up when we're ready to wake it up, which normally would be for me in January, for others probably February, but that will store perfectly fine as long as we can just keep it cool, airy and frost free. We don't need to wrap these up in anything or mess about, or I don't. If you do wrap them up, and if you do cover them in vermiculite or store them in tubs, and that works for you, stick with it. Don't ever change what works just because someone else has shown you how to do it somehow differently. That's how I do it. It seems to work well enough for me, and that's the way I'll stick to it. So that's ready to be set up. We've just got to do this now, probably about 100 times to get them all done and ready to keep or wake up. So I've trimmed up these Aggie. It's the same principle as the pot tubers. Sometimes I can get 3 in a tray, sometimes I can get just 2. This looks like it's going to be just 2. So we'll just nestle that under there, as long as most of it is in. That's the other one. Before you pack one in, just make sure you can fit them in, because you might have to turn them around or adjust them a bit. Just poke the roots in. Don't want to get everything under, so that's probably quite good as it is. And then I'm quite messy with this, but it gets it in there. Just pile it on and around. And you can probably do this if you're that way inclined with a drier soil, as long as you're leaving the crowns exposed. You'll probably find that they'll keep in the trays and store quite well, and even start waking up. Lift it out, because I don't want to rattle the camera too much more. Just give the tubers a rattle. You tend to find that that moves the compost into those little gaps and crevices. A bit like when you're trying to get the compost off, you have a little tickle and a poke. And by giving it a shake, you're just making sure that, again, you're not covering the crown of the tuber with compost. Make sure the tray labels are firmly in, and then that one will be ready to go onto the bench. Or, as I say, I know some people would do that with a drier compost and just keep them sitting there like that. And in a cold greenhouse they may well decide they're going to shoot. If you've got very thin tubers, these aren't thin but very hairy ones that tend to shrivel, it can be advisable just to set them up into a tray, just to stop them drying out too quick or too much. And if you think they are, then you can pop them on heat. As exhibitors, and some of us seem to magic these plants out at various times of the year. Well, it's not through luck, it's planning. So I know that Aggie Whites and any of the broom families are slow to start, are poor to throw lots of shoots. So there's no point sitting these on the bench and waiting until February to wake them up. I'd rather spend a couple of pounds on a bit of electric in a tray, then go off to David and purchase 30-40 plants at £3 each. I'm not going to use £100 worth of electric between now in February, then I'd rather have the stock and have it secured than messing about trying to borrow big borrow and steal from anyone and everyone. So they'll go on the heat with the pot tubers, along with a tray of Bryn, and hopefully that'll give me my stock. But it's quite simple, it's just about doing it. I have to prioritise because I haven't got all the time in the world, so I'll do the things like this first, then I'll go through the rest of the pot tubers, tidy those up, then I'll go through the field tubers and tidy them up. And if I think there's any danger of any of them not making it through, then I'll put them on heat and I'll wake them up. Once they're awake, you can just keep them ticking along. Take a few cuttings if you want to, but generally you can just cut them down and keep them growing, and then start taking the cuttings when you want to, from other plants or even planting out. But that's what I do. When you're thinking about cutting the tuber down, this one here, you can see that's where the plant would have been stopped originally as a young plant, and then the 4 resulting side shoots. You could go in there and cut that whole cluster off, but as you can see already, it's dried out quite nicely on each of those joints, and that's only in a week. As long as we don't put water down that hole, I'd rather leave that intact rather than going into this very fat stem down here and causing probably a lot of damage and more trouble. It's gambles that we take, but for me I'd rather leave it like that. I tend to find these tubers that are this sort of shape tend to stay sound throughout the season, and I don't tend to get any rot problems. When you start butchering them down here very close to the crown, I think sometimes you're asking for trouble. That's my thoughts. You know, on the bench, it's just a Vitapod tray. I always put the thermometer or the thermostat sensor in the compost. I want to know what the temperature of the compost is, where the tuber is, not necessarily how hot the tray is, because the two doesn't normally go hand in hand. So there's only 3 trays there. It's all the Bryn family. You'd probably do the same with the Goldcrests, which are just as problematic if you grow those. The tray's not full up, and in the aim to not waste heat, I just put a bit of bubble on the area that's not got anything on. Probably in the process of going through the rest of the pot tubers and realising that some of them probably aren't as good as I'd like them to be, I'll end up filling up another 2 trays onto this bench, and that normally does me. The rest of them will sit there, and at some point in December I'll settle them up into trays and put them on the larger propagating bench, as large as it can be in a 6x8 greenhouse. Traditionally, 1st of January, I turn on the heat. The National Grid sends me a bottle of wine thanking them for the electricity bill, and then off we go. But as I say, there's no point taking chances on varieties that you know are going to be problems before you start. Good luck. Hope the tubers lift well if you're still lifting them, keep well if you're still keeping them, and shoot well when you want them to.